Part 1. The World Before the Fall. There are moments in human history when the sky seems to stop breathing, and before the flood, the world stands on the brink of chaos. It was an age when humanity had lost the spiritual balance that its ancestors had once maintained. The young city-states of Mesopotamia burned under a red sun like molten metal. From the flat roofs, smoke from sacrifices rose in billows, mingling with the sound of drums, shouts, and knives cutting flesh in bloody rituals. Caravans of wealthy merchants exploited the poor. Young warriors fought for power. The worshippers burned incense and wine in corrupted rain-making rituals. No one retained the holiness that humanity was meant to have. In the midst of that hazy atmosphere, there was still a figure standing quietly outside the chaos. Noah. His hair was weathered. His shoulders were broad, but rough from a lifetime of toil. His gaze was always fixed on the horizon, where the Euphrates slowly flowed as if burdened with a terrible secret. He saw the world as a piece of cloth being torn apart, pieces of morality being torn from its frame. The unruly laughter, the mournful cries in the night, the horrible living sacrifices, all of them were like knives that cut deep into his conscience. Noah lived humbly, caring for his flock and his small plot of land. He took no part in the quarrels, did not participate in the cruel rituals. People considered him strange, conservative, even out of place, but he stood firm, like a rock in the middle of a waterfall. Then one night, when the north wind blew through the tent roof, creating long, wailing sounds like the wailing of the earth, Noah suddenly heard another sound. Not the wind, not the wild beasts of the desert. It echoed in his mind, so deep that it froze his blood. It was the Creator's judgment. Noah, the voice said, deep as a thunder from the earth. The world is filled with violence. Rot has crept into every corner of the human heart. The flood will come, sweeping away all life. Prepare yourself. Noah stood motionless for a long time. The sky outside darkened, as if even the stars had held their breath. The Euphrates beneath his feet, usually gentle, suddenly became heavy, thick as oil. In that moment, he understood that the prophesy was not just a prediction, it was the beginning of a new era. And the task that lay before him would change the fate of all mankind. Part 2. The Ship in the Desert. The next morning, as the sun rose like a burning coin in the desert sky, Noah stood in the midst of the cracked earth. Sand and dust clung to his heels, and the dry desert wind cut into his skin like small blades. In his hand was a blueprint handed down by revelation. A gigantic ship, dozens of meters long, 3 stories high, with sealed compartments, large doors, and clearly defined materials. Noah looked at it as he looked at his own destiny. The fragrant gumwood, amber in the sun, was selected piece by piece by him. No one in the area had ever seen such a crazy project. A ship, not a boat, but a floating fortress was being sketched out in the heart of the dry desert, where rain was rarer than the smiles of the gods. His neighbors first looked at him with puzzled eyes. Then they laughed. Their laughter rang dry like stones rolling on the ground. Noah is crazy, they whispered. There is no water in this desert, and he wants to set sail? Some shook their heads in pity. Some of the bolder ones threw small stones at him, making fun of him as a pastime of the day. The children ran around, shouting and imitating the sound of the waves to mock him. They saw only a foolish old man, sawing away large pieces of wood without meaning. They did not know that each blow of his hammer struck not only the wood, but also the future of all mankind. But Noah did not respond. He continued, each hammer blow, regular, clack, 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 resounding across the vast desert like the heartbeat of the only person who could still hear the call of heaven. His eyes did not waver, his hands did not tremble. His wife, Naamah, stood by in silence. She did not understand, but she believed in her husband, who had always lived uprightly. The 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, though bewildered, still carried the wood, tied ropes, and built the frame with him. They did not hear the verdict, but they heard the sincerity in their father's voice. Day after day, the sun burned their backs, but the ship grew larger, rising from the ground like a giant awakening. The hull curved, the planks were stacked in layers, resin coated every joint to make it waterproof, as the instructions said. Each step of the construction made the outsiders more and more uncomfortable. At first, they laughed, but gradually the laughter died away. Instead, there were looks of suspicion, annoyance, even anger. They asked Noah, "Where is the water? Where is the rain? What streams will rise up here? Why do you warn of disaster when no one sees it?" They stood before him, hands on hips, their breaths mixed with alcohol and anger. They wanted him to stop so the world could return to normal, so they wouldn't have to face the insecurity he created. But Noah just wiped the sweat from his forehead, straightened his back, and replied with a sentence no one wanted to hear. Time is running out. It wasn't a threat. It was the truth. A truth that he knew better than anyone else. Part 3, Signs in the Sky. One evening, as the sun was about to set behind the red sands, Noah was doing his usual inspection of the ark's frame. He ran his hands over the pine-scented planks, listening to the wood ring under his fingers, when he suddenly realized something strange. The wind had changed direction. It was no longer the dry, hot desert wind that stretched from the east, but a cold wind cold enough to sting the skin. It blew from the north, carrying the scent of distant lands that people had never set foot on. The sky above gradually turned a deep purple, as if dyed with some dark ink. The clouds rolled, swirling at an unnatural speed, like vortexes of falling tears that had not yet reached the ground. The last light of day cast a chaotic spectrum of colors: red, mixed with purple, purple, mixed with black on those clouds, full of anxiety. In the nearby fields, the herds of cattle suddenly became restless. The sheep paced around, refusing to lie down. The cows mooed incessantly as if signaling disaster. The goats scattered, none of them willing to stand still. The shepherd children called to each other, trying to hold the herd together, but the more they tried, the more panicked the cattle became. In the sky, migratory birds flew in chaotic formations, no longer in the familiar V-shaped formation. They cut through the wind, then suddenly changed direction as if pushed by an invisible force. Their wings flapped wildly, their shrill cries echoing down to the bare earth. In the Euphrates, fish floated to the surface in such great numbers that they formed dark, undulating patches, as if the water were boiling. They yawned, thrashed about, and then flipped over, their bellies white, a sight never seen before. Passers-by just stood there, watching, then shaking their heads, unable to comprehend the hidden meaning. The people began to talk, but no one would admit the fear that was creeping into them. It's just the weather, they reassured themselves. It's just a strange wind season. It will pass. Their blind confidence made them ignore all the signs, even though each one was as big as the hand of a god, clearly marking the sky. Then a bolt of lightning tore across the sky. Unlike normal lightning, the flash was long and thick, like a fiery snake slithering across the black sky. Immediately after, there was a loud thunderclap, not like the thunder of the rainy season, but like the death drum of the universe descending upon the world. That night, the people's sleep was torn apart by the sounds of tremors from deep within the earth. The earth trembled as if something was waking up underneath. Some tents collapsed, wooden stakes were pulled out of the ground, and ceramic pots in the house shook so much that they fell and broke. People woke up with panic in their eyes, but in the morning they tried to brush it off, thinking it was just a bad dream. No one wanted to accept the fact that they were standing at the door of disaster. Noah, meanwhile, stood before the ark in the darkness. The cold wind whipped at his clothes, blowing his hair loosely. He did not say a word. He just looked up at the sky. The purple-black sky was swirling like a giant wound. He knew. The time had come. Part 4. The Journey of the Creatures. The Last Door of Survival. The first rain that fell on the land was unlike any the land had ever seen. Not in gentle drops, but in heavy, piercing sprays, hissing down from the purple-black sky like cold spears. Noah was examining the roof of the ark when he heard a strange sound coming from the foothills. At first it was a faint rustling, then footsteps, then the sound of the earth itself shifting. He stopped, raised his head, and he saw them. The animals began to emerge from the opaque rain, 2 by 2, just as he had heard that day. They walked without haste, without panic, but as if obeying an invisible command, older than the earth itself. 2 elephants led the way. They moved slowly up the slope, their huge figures silhouetted against the gray rain, each step making the ground tremble. Behind them came a pair of lions, their rain-drenched fur gleaming gold, their fiery eyes staring straight at the ship. No roar, no threat, just the silence of 2 warriors accepting their fate. In the air, sparrows, falcons, and crows flew in flocks, their wings cutting through the wind in haste but order. The flapping of their wings created a murmuring sound, like a whisper in the sky. On the ground, deer shivered with cold and fear, huddled close together. A curious brown fox raised its head, sniffing the air, already saturated with moisture and a sense of disaster. The sight left the nearby villagers stunned. They stood under the shelter, their clothes soaked, their eyes wide. Never before had they seen such a powerful surge of natural instinct. The animals they had hunted, tamed, worshipped, or feared were now moving together in one direction. No fighting, no roaring. Someone whispered, "What is happening?" But no one had an answer. Noah and his family stood before the large wooden door of the ark. The wooden door was open, wider than any gate ever built in the village. A dim light from within illuminated their faces, half light, half shadow, as if fate itself were cutting them off from the rest of the world. The animals stepped onto the gangplank, their eyes multicolored, instinctive, turned one by one into the safe darkness within. Wild animals, livestock, herbivores, birds, all filed into solemn silence. There was no growling, no chaos, none of the usual fear between rival species. It was as if everyone understood that this was the last door of survival, the only lifeline against the angry arm of nature. Nama reached out to stroke the head of a trembling sheep. Shem and Japheth steadied the entrance, while Ham tied more ropes to keep the boards from slipping in the rain. Everyone was tense but still working in a rhythm that had long been established. Outside, the rain grew louder, pounding against the hull like a warning. It was not man who first learned to fear. It was the beasts when nature changed its countenance. A clap of thunder sounded on the horizon. The sky closed like the eyelids of a god preparing for judgment, and in a flash of lightning, the stream of creatures continued to enter the ship, a long, orderly, sacred line as a final rite of passage for the world before its wrath. Part 5. The door close and the sky breaks. When the last pair of creatures, a pair of white doves with gray feathers, circled the hull and landed on the wooden steps, Noah knew the list of life was complete. The two birds closed their wings in an eerie silence, like a final period before the world turned to a new chapter. Noah placed his hands on the plank, looked into their small eyes, and nodded. They were the last visitors to the old earth. He stood slowly. The wind had changed color. It was no longer a chilly warning, but a wind of anger. His hair and cloak whipped to one side, but Noah stood upright, his hands gripping the door pull, as if grasping the last thread between humanity and judgment. The giant door began to rise, the long, echoing sound of wood, followed by a sound like a sob caught in his throat. The remaining crowd stood outside, their heads in the rain, straining to see inside the ark. They still couldn't believe what was happening before their eyes. The animals moving in orderly, the doors closing, and Noah, the man they called mad, preparing to lock up the living world. Then the sky cracked, not like ordinary thunder, but as if the dome of heaven was being torn apart. A streak of purple-white light streaked across the sky, then widened into countless spiderweb-thin fissures. The crack sounded like the cracking of stone, like the giant bones of the universe creaking. The first drops of water fell. But they were not light, not soft. Each drop fell as heavy as a small stone, hitting the sand in a streak like an iron nail. Then the next drops fell in droves, so fast that the human eye could not follow. The wind howled, a long, violent howl, lashing straight at the hull. The masts shook, the anchors tensed as if about to snap. Noah looked out through the open door, saw tents flying off the ground, objects being swept away like dry leaves. In a few short minutes, the rain had become an irresistible storm. The ground, dry for years, had softened. Sand had turned to mud. The path had turned into a muddy stream, carrying everything along with it, growing stronger by the second. Noah raised his head, taking one last look at the people outside. They stood in the rain, eyes wide with horror they could no longer deny. It was the moment when mockery turned to fear, arrogance to pleading. Before the door closed completely, Noah whispered, his voice mixed with the wind. "Please forgive them." The heavy door closed. There was a thud, a final, heavy, final seal of fate. Inside, Noah closed his eyes, placing his hand on the door as if to feel the part of the world that had just been severed. Outside, water began pouring down from all sides from the sky, from the cracks in the earth, from the Euphrates, rising like an ancient beast awakened. In an instant, everything was drowned out by the only sound that remained, the sound of falling water. The door closed, and the rampage had begun. Part 6. Day 1 of the Great Flood. The earth reaches, the sea rises, the sky collapses. The rain no longer felt like rain. It poured down like giant walls of water, falling straight from the cracked sky. The drops were so heavy that they hit the ground with an explosive sound, sending sand and rocks flying in waves. The sky was pitch black, but each flash of lightning was so bright that you could see the individual drops of water falling in steep slopes toward the earth. The ground began to crack. The first cracks were as small as hairs, but in an instant they spread, widening into long fissures, then into deep chasms. From underground streams of water surged up like inverted columns of fire. They sprayed straight up into the sky, mixing with the rain to form a whirlpool of water. Water falling from the sky, water spraying from the earth. Earth, sky, and sea, mixed together into an unprecedented chaos. Within hours, nearby villages vanished from the face of the earth. Houses were swept away like straw. Brick walls were shattered. Screams echoed from all sides, torn apart by the thunder and wind. The people who had once laughed at Noah now ran through the mud, slipping and falling, trying to cling to anything that floated on the rising water. Noah's ark, which had lain on dry ground for months, began to rock. Water rose in layers, grasping the timbers like giant hands. A long, deep hiss sounded from the bow as the current lifted it from the ground. The entire ship rose like a piece of bark being torn away by the water. The timbers groaned under the force of the water, but held firm thanks to the solid structure dictated by the revelation. Inside the ark, Noah's family clung to the wooden walls. Each blow of the water against the hull was like a heavy hammer blow, shaking the darkness. Nama held onto the water jugs to keep them from falling. Shem and Japheth held the internal mooring lines. Ham ran down the corridor, checking each stall. The smell of damp wood, pine resin, and the sound of water hitting the hull mingled in a heady mix of survival. In the dark corners, the animals trembled. The elephant bellowed a long, echoing roar, but the sound was immediately drowned out by the roar of the storm outside. The deer huddled together in a trembling group. The lions crouched, their eyes squinting at the flash of lightning. On the wooden beams above, the birds perched close together, their black eyes wide and unblinking, as if searching through the darkness for a glimmer of hope. Every time the hull tilted, their fur stood on end in fear. In the sky, the thunder and lightning never stopped. Long, thick bolts of lightning, like the whips of God striking the ground, split the sky in two, revealing a white background so bright that one could see through the swirling clouds behind. The thunder followed each lightning strike so quickly that it seemed as if the sky and earth were roaring at the same time. The waters rose without end. Everything sank, layer upon layer. The earth became the sea became a storm, and the sky collapsed like the final curtain covering the life of the world. Thus began the first day of the flood in a crash, a cry, a bang of water, and a plea blown away by the wind into nothingness. Part 7. In the belly of the ship, the loneliness of the survivors. Day 20. On the endless water, the ship drifted like a small dot between the leaden sky and the shoreless sea. There was no trace of land, no mountains, no valleys, no sign of the world that had once existed. There was only the silence of water and clouds, as if the ark were drifting between two giant mirrors, reflecting the infinite emptiness. Inside, the rhythm of Noah's family's life became a series of repetitive but obligatory tasks. They cared for hundreds of creatures, fetching water, distributing food, checking bedding, cleaning up waste. Large animals like elephants, rhinos, and horses had to be fed more, and small ones had to be taken special care not to be trampled in panic when the ark tilted. The sounds of animal footsteps, snorts, low growls, and startled cries permeated every level of the ship. The air sometimes smelled of mold, wet wood, and rotting straw. On the lower decks, the hot breath of the creatures created a thin layer of mist that clung to the walls of the ark. Shem often had to open the vents to relieve the stuffiness, but the wind outside carried a chill, forcing them to constantly adjust. The creaking of the hull and the pounding of the water were like the heartbeat of a giant creature struggling to stay afloat in the angry ocean. At night, when the flickering oil lamps were lit, Noah would quietly step onto the deck. The sky was pitch black, punctuated only by a few distant flashes of lightning, still smoldering from the storms that had recently passed. He stood there, a lone figure swallowed by the endless void. The wind whipped at his cloak, cutting into his skin like a knife, but Noah did not leave. Every night, he searched for a sign. A star, a light, a flash of earth beneath the waves. Nama would often follow him for a while. She would put her hand on his shoulder, feeling it weigh down as if it were carrying the rest of the world. Her voice was small, weak, but still full of hope. Will we find land? Noah looked as far as the eye could see only the dark shadows of water and answered, his voice as deep as ancient stone. Life was not made to disappear. We will find it. But in that voice, though steady, there was a small tremor, a nameless worry. Noah felt the weight of judgment, of responsibility, of countless creatures that depended on him for survival. He knew he had to be strong, to trust, to be the only pillar in a sea that was trying to swallow all hope. But deep down, loneliness gnawed at him every night, the loneliness of being the only one who heard the voice of heaven and had to lead the rest of humanity through the endless darkness. Part 8. Crows, Dog and Return of Hope. Day 40. A morning so silent that Noah could hardly believe his ears. No more rain, no more wind howling against the hull, no more distant roars of storms. The air was quiet, as if the whole world were holding its breath after a long, raging fury. Noah stepped onto the deck. For the first time in weeks, a faint streak of light appeared in the sky, thin as a silver thread across the still heavy gray clouds. The clouds began to disperse, opening up a misty horizon, revealing rare shades of pale blue. The water, though still vast, was less angry, smooth as a mirror reflecting the weariness of the world after the death. Noah opened a small wooden door on the side of the ship. A light breeze rushed in, carrying with it the damp smell of the ocean and a hint of earth and sand from somewhere far away. The feeling stopped him, a feeling he had forgotten for the past 40 days. Hope. He released a crow. The jet-black crow spread its wings powerfully, soared into the sky, circled the ark in a wide circle, and then flew off into the distant, hazy distance. Noah's family watched it until it was only a speck, then disappeared. But the crow did not return. The day passed without the sound of wings tapping on wood, without any sign. The next day, with calm hands but eyes filled with anticipation, Noah released a dove. Unlike the crow, the dove flew lighter, softer, like the only piece of peace left. It flew toward the sun, carrying with it the small but persistent hope that Noah had held onto for weeks adrift. Dusk fell. Red-orange light spread across the sea, reflecting off the glittering scales that clung to the deck. No one spoke. Noah's family sat together in silence, each holding a different expectation. Even the animals quieted, the occasional roars were gone, replaced by an eerie silence as if everyone were waiting with them. Then, in the silence that was just enough to make one despair a little more, the sound of wings flapping. Noah raised his head. A small white dot appeared in the sunset sky. Then it grew larger. Then it took shape. Slender wings were gliding toward the ark. The dove had returned. Noah's heart was pounding like it had never pounded since the door had closed. The dove landed in his hand, breathing softly, exhausted but still proud. And in its beak was a small olive branch, green, fresh, like the first drop of blood of life turning in the Dead Sea. The family broke into tears. Nama burst into tears, her shoulders shaking with relief. Shem, Ham, and Japheth embraced, unable to hide their smiles after weeks of fear. The animals sensed the change as well. The lions let out low growls, not threateningly, but as a call to the earth. The baby birds in the upper deck flapped their wings, and the sheep huddled together as if they could smell the earth on the wind. When the olive branch appeared, the heavens did not only announce the earth, they announced forgiveness. Amidst the vast sea and sky, that young olive branch was the first promise of a new world about to rise from the mud and ruins. Part 9. Landing on the Ararat Mountains, the doors open again. After days of drifting in the endless sea and sky, the ship finally slowed down. The gentle vibrations of the breathing earth echoed through the deck. Then there was a soft crash, not violent, not dangerous, just a gentle touch from the earth to its wandering child. The ship had touched the mountainside. The clouds parted layer by layer, like thin curtains pulled aside by invisible hands. And before them, the peak of Ararat appeared tall, snow-white, so high it seemed to touch the sky. The light reflected off the ice, creating a halo, making the mountain look like a throne of new earth rising from the sea. Noah stood before the great door for a long time. He put his hand on the hinge, felt the cold metal, then pushed hard. The door opened with a long, deep groan. No longer the farewell sound of the day the door closed, but the greeting of a new world. Light poured in warm, gentle, flowing over the wooden walls like a golden stream. It was no longer the lightning of judgment, but the dawn of rebirth. The first creatures stepped out. A pair of deer hesitantly touched the soft, still moist ground. They sniffed the air, then ran a few short steps, as if testing the feeling of freedom after many days locked in the darkness. Then came the cows, horses, sheep, goats, each species descending one after another, eyes wide open at the vast space before them. Birds flapped their wings and flew up, leaving small white streaks in the newly restored blue sky. As the animals spread out in all directions, the sound of footsteps, cries, and flapping wings formed the first music of the new world. It was the sound of life returning, of life seeking soil to grow. There was no roar, no chaos. There was only a strange peace, as if all creatures understood that from here on, they had to start all over again. Noah's family stepped off the ark. They stood on the new land, feeling the softness of the mud, the warmth of the sun, the gentleness of the wind. Eyes that had seen the Dead Sea now opened to another current, the current of hope. They were no longer looking for traces of the old world. They knew there was nothing left to find. Everything had been washed away, transformed into memories of a dead age. But the sky was blue again, White clouds drifted lazily like sheep lost in the endless grasslands. The wind blew gently, no longer howling as a warning, but whispering as if to comfort. And the land, though barren, was still full of promise, like a blank page waiting for humanity to write the first lines of a new era. A world reborn from tears, from journeys, and from faith. Part 10, End. Rainbow and the Final Covenant. When the sun finally rose from the fading rains, its light was unlike any morning Noah had ever seen. No longer was the dull light filtering through the storm clouds. No longer was the purple gloom covering the water. Instead, it was a warm, clean light as a baby's first breath. It touched the tip of Mount Ararat, then spread down the rocky slopes, evaporating the thin layer of mist clinging to the ark's hull. Then, in the newly restored blue sky, a streak of light appeared. At first it was just a faint, curved ray, as faint as smoke. Then it widened, deepened, and split into many colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. A perfect arch stretched across the sky like a gate built by the light of the sky itself. The first rainbow. Noah's family was silent. They had never seen a phenomenon so beautiful that it made their hearts stop. The light not only shone into the sky, but also reflected on their faces, on the remaining puddles, on the animal tracks imprinted on the soft earth. Each color was like a word of comfort, like a gentle touch from the most sacred place. Noah looked up, his eyes filled with tears. The wrinkles on his face, once deep with storms and responsibility, seemed to relax under the color. Not tears of sadness, tears of relief, tears of someone who had crossed the border of despair and now saw promise. And the Creator said, "Never again will I let the waters of a flood destroy the earth." Those words floated on the wind, but they weighed like stones in the hearts of everyone standing there. They understood that the wrath had ended, but something greater had just begun: the responsibility to build, preserve, and love a new world. Noah's family stood on the mountainside, looking down on the receding waters of a land. Not without fear, for they were the first generation of a world that had just experienced death. But fear was now only a shadow behind. What glimmered before their eyes was hope. Hope that life could always be reborn, even after the greatest wrath. Hope that the rainbow was not just a phenomenon of light, but an undying promise between man and heaven and earth. The rainbow still shines silently, stretching out in the sky, like the last mark of eternal forgiveness. A mark that from now on, every time it rains and then shines again, people will look up and remember that life always has a chance to start again.